Hello, everyone. Happy Tuesday. Get started here in a couple minutes. Just pretend that there's elevator music playing right now. Maybe it's playing in your head. But we're still working on getting that for Zoom. All right, there's a couple names I see on here. It's good to see some folks. Frank, Mr. Cardella, nice to see you again.
Hello. Hello. Hope everybody's having a good week.
Yeah, it's a good week so far. I have to remind myself it's only Tuesday, though. The rest of the week ahead of us. But yeah, it's been great. All right, I'm going to give folks about 20 more seconds to trickle in, and then we will get started. In the meantime, for folks who are here, if you could please change your name on Zoom to include your locality, where you're coming from, and your pronouns. And you can change your name by clicking on the participants button. And then once that list comes up, there's 3 dots that you can click on that pop up to the right of your name, and then you can rename. All right, well, I'm sure folks are going to keep trickling in, but I'm just going to go ahead and get started. If you could go to the next slide, please. So to introduce myself, my name is Lee Evans. I'm a policy coordinator at the Research to Action Lab at the Urban Institute. My work here for the past 3 or so years has focused mainly on upward mobility, which we'll be talking about today. And so I'm thrilled to be here, and I'm thrilled to be with you all. And I want to pass it to my colleague Alexis to quickly introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alexis Weaver, and I am a policy program associate also in the Research to Action Lab. And in my role, I also provide technical assistance to localities on upward mobility, which I come to with experience in the nonprofit food security and economic development sectors. And I'll be speaking to you shortly, and I'll turn it back to Lee.
Thank you, Alexis. So here's our agenda for the day. As you can see, we're going to start off with a quick refresher on the Upward Mobility Initiative. Now, for those of you who are at the last workshop, or if you've engaged with us on upward mobility before, this probably won't be new to you, but it's always worth a refresher. Then we'll move on to discuss some of the key components of local action on upward mobility, which is, of course, the reason that we're all here today, before transitioning into a smaller group discussion where you all will have an opportunity to discuss upward mobility work ongoing in your own communities with other peers on this call. I will finish today's session by discussing some of the tools available for folks like yourselves interested in beginning and advancing this work. And one note that this is an interactive workshop. So as Alexis and I are speaking, please feel free to drop your thoughts in the chat, ask questions as they arise, share ideas as they come to you, share examples of work that you all are doing. We only ask that if you have a question that you want to vocalize, aka speak out loud, and not put in the chat, use the raise hand function so that folks aren't speaking over each other. Next slide. Okay, wonderful. So refresh on the Upward Mobility Initiative, and you can move to the next one, Nico. Thank you. So the overarching mission of our upward mobility work, which began over 5 years ago now, is to help communities create or improve conditions that advance upward mobility and racial equity. Now, many local leaders have committed to this hard work of dismantling barriers and building systems that support upward mobility, but we've found that they often lack the information they need to reach those goals and understand whether their efforts are working. So the Upward Mobility Initiative helps communities fill these gaps. We provide communities with a way to understand and measure upward mobility. Next slide. So this is the upward mobility framework. And as you can see at the top, we start with the 3-part definition, which recognizes that upward mobility is about more than just economic success. True upward mobility requires that people have power and autonomy, as well as a sense of being valued by their community. So to move out of poverty and stay out of poverty, people also need to feel that they have power and autonomy in their lives, the ability to make choices that and influence actions that affect their future, and feel as though they are valued in their community and can contribute to it. So underneath the three-part definition, we've identified 5 pillars that communities need in order to support the upward mobility of their residents. These essential pillars overlap to some extent and reflect the diversity of policy domains that are relevant to mobility from poverty. Now, underpinning and interwoven into every one of those pillars is a focus on racial equity, which is ensuring equitable access for all, especially for people of color and other marginalized groups who have been most denied access to upward mobility. Now, within each pillar, we have a set of predictors, which are evidence-based factors that are strongly associated with the likelihood that a community can create conditions to boost the economic and social mobility of its residents while narrowing racial and ethnic inequities. And underneath each predictor, a corresponding set of mobility metrics. So here are some examples of what we talk about when we say mobility metrics. And what they are is a comprehensive but concise set of 26 metrics that can be used to support communities across the country and change makers across sectors. So for each predictor, we've provided at least one metric that can be used to compare and monitor a community's performance over time. So for example, to understand a community's political participation, which is a predictor, the metric to measure that predictor is the share of the voting age population who turned out to vote in the previous presidential election. These metrics are foundational to understanding the conditions that inhibit or increase upward mobility in your community. So since 2021, Urban has directly supported 34 localities through direct technical assistance across the country in using the upward mobility framework to identify strategies aimed at increasing upward mobility and racial equity. And we've also supported dozens of other communities by presenting to existing teams and networks. And as we continue to support diverse communities across the country, we're using our shared learning to develop new tools and resources and document how the framework can help overcome challenges and increase the impacts of these efforts. So I know I went quickly through this refresher section. Hopefully much of it was review and is not new. But in any case, thank you, Katie, for dropping our website link into the chat, and you can learn a lot more about the initiative as a whole, as well as the framework that undergirds our work. Okay, so transitioning to local action on upward mobility. So in thinking about what local action looks like, it's important to consider first who are the people and the actors actually initiating and advancing that action. Now, traditionally, this work has been left up to local and regional government to advance on their own, but there's an increasing recognition that other actors can bring unique resources, expertise, and social capital to this mission. So as you can see, local government is still immensely important, as they can use their policy and regulatory authority to draft laws and create programs that enable systems change. Nonprofits and community-based organizations can use their programmatic expertise and relationships in the community to help elevate issues of concern for residents and connect them to resources. Advocacy groups can help provide research on a specific policy topic. Philanthropies can contribute financial support to a cause and can use their status to advocate for policy change. Research organizations like the Urban Institute can provide training and technical assistance, collect and analyze data, evaluate programs and policies, and conduct original research on a specific policy topic. Anchor institutions can use their status in a community and their political and financial capital to support cross-sector goals. And private sector actors, especially large regional employers and housing developers, can support specific policy agendas or interventions and adopt equitable business practices. For example, living wage policies. So really, local leaders across all these different groups have a role to play when it comes to boosting upward mobility from poverty. So I want to pause there for a second. And we're curious, where are you all coming from today? What kind of actor are you coming and representing? And there may be more than one, because we know that folks are often not just in local government, but they're also community members. They may also be involved in faith-based organizations. So I see you all are already firing away at this poll, which is great. And I see the answers coming in, and I'll give folks about 15 seconds to fill it out. All right, going to end it in 3, 2, 1. Perfect. I'll share the results with folks. So I think you all can see the results here on the screen. It looks like mostly local government, which is wonderful and not all too unexpected. But a few folks too from some of the other organizations, and it's awesome to see community members here as well. And it looks like maybe we need to do some more work getting those faith-based organizations and advocacy groups in. So anyway, thank you for that. I'm going to stop sharing. All right, next slide, please. So to this point around engaging a variety of actors in this work, I want to highlight Summit County, Ohio's Mobility Coalition. Now, Summit County was one of our beta cohort communities, and you can see from these logos on the slide that they engaged over a dozen different governmental and community-based organizations to build their coalition. And this coalition included faith-based initiatives, youth-centered organizations, as well as Akron school, justice, and business leaders, among many others. Summit County utilized this coalition by hosting 5 monthly meetings, which were used to set goals, create shared definitions, co-create strategic actions, ensure sustainability, and build a communication plan. So moving on, what does local action for upper mobility look like? Well, it includes lots of different activities, as you can imagine, that build upon and reinforce each other. So we've articulated some of those activities into a few buckets, which you can see on screen and which I'll speak to. But I want to note, of course, that these buckets are not exhaustive. Rather, they're organized in this way to help you think about the diversity of ways in which local action is accomplished. And I'll speak to them and give a few examples of the kinds of activities that could be included in each of these buckets. So starting with using data to make decisions. This could include simply reviewing your community's mobility metrics. It could mean creating a data sharing agreement to get access to key local data. Or it could be administering your own local survey to fill data gaps. Conducting community engagement. You might plan a virtual launch event for your mobility work. You might host a data walk to get community input on key challenges. You might convene a community advisory board to provide input on project priorities and strategies from start to completion. Partnering with cross-sector actors. I spoke to this in the Summit County example, and work in this bucket can include gaining buy-in and commitment from local government and community leaders. It might also be developing a shared measurement plan to track progress towards goals your coalition has identified. Identifying policy interventions, the reason we're all here. So to achieve this, you might convene subject matter experts to discuss policy design. You might develop a theory of change that articulates how your actions will achieve the progress you want to see. You might even pilot a promising intervention in your community. Applying the 3-part definition. This is about considering how your interventions emphasize and improve not just economic success, but power and autonomy and a sense of belonging for residents. As you consider various programs and policies, you should be asking yourself, how am I empowering residents holistically? Aligning on systems change. So barriers to mobility are upheld by our current systems and structures. Taking a systems change approach means looking at how systemic failures intersect, which means that work to affect systems change means breaking down silos between governmental departments by creating interagency working groups. You might also create an inventory of all recently published municipal plans in your community and crosswalk the shared priorities included in each of them to identify places for increased collaboration. Identifying racial disparities and eliminating racial structural barriers. So all of our work needs to have an emphasis on ensuring equitable access to upper mobility for all. That means that people are receiving just treatment, they receive fair compensation for their contributions, and that they can reach their maximum social and economic potential regardless of race or where they live. It also means removing the structural barriers that prevent people of certain racial and ethnic groups from reaching that maximum social and economic potential. and by meaningfully engaging these groups in decision-making. Now, this could look like making sure that all the data you gather is disaggregated by race and ethnicity across multiple domains and at the smallest geography possible. It could be facilitating trainings that shift mental models and behaviors in your office so that they are more equitable. It might be investing in the capacity building of community members and nonprofit organizations so that they can build their expertise and ultimately push this work forward. Now, as I mentioned, the activities on this screen are mutually reinforcing, and many of the actions you undertake will consider themes across all 7 of these buckets. So we have a quick speed journaling activity for you now, and we want you to take a minute to think through and or jot down, if you want, your thoughts to some of these following questions, which we will return to in a little bit. So the questions are here on the page. How are you currently promoting upward mobility work in your community? Where do you feel the most prepared to engage? Where do you foresee challenges? And how do your efforts support not just economic success, but also power and autonomy and belonging and dignity among community members? So take about 45 seconds, think through. If you have a pen and paper or pencil and paper in front of you, feel free to jot it down. And like I said, we will return to this later. So just take a couple seconds and I'll call you all back when it's time. Nico, would you mind going back? Thank you. All right, about 30 more seconds. All right, wrapping up. 5 seconds. All right, hopefully you were able to do some thinking or write something down. And Nico, please go to the next slide. So we do want to highlight one of the buckets mentioned earlier, community engagement, because it underpins all of our upward mobility work. And as you can see and read on the screen, community engagement is about recognizing and centering the expertise of the people who are at the heart of the challenges and the solutions that we study by intentionally including their input, participation, and priorities into decisions, processes, and practice. Now, this includes ensuring that the outreach that you all are doing to potential participants reaches the households that represent demographics and diversity of your city or county. It means learning about historical inequities in your community and determining root causes. It means uncovering implicit biases and assumptions that community leadership may hold, and then working to share power in the decision-making process. And aside from being critical for ensuring equitable outcomes in this work, community engagement will also make your work better and more comprehensive. It can shed additional light on community conditions and data. It increases buy-in and enthusiasm on the strategic actions that you set out to implement. And it creates a powerful set of voices that can hold elected officials accountable for following through on commitments. Now, I won't spend too much time on this slide, but I do want to note that community input should be sought and incorporated at every stage of the upward mobility planning process. And you can see on this table that we've matched various phases of engagement with the corresponding community engagement methods that you might employ to gather input during those particular stages. So with that, we have a short breakout activity for you all. And you can go to the next slide, Nico. So we're going to break out into groups of 3, and we'll make the breakout room, so don't have to worry about deciding which one to go in, for about 12 minutes. And it'll just be folks in this room, so we might pop in, but it'll be an opportunity for you all to discuss and think through some of the speed journaling questions that we prompted you earlier. So take about 4 minutes to talk through ongoing work in your community. And again, this is your time to use to connect and also get some additional ideas of kind of the upward mobility work that is going on around the country. So you can go ahead and open the breakout rooms. And you should be automatically assigned. And if not, we will make sure you get to the right place. So I just want to take 3 minutes here and see if any groups that had a good discussion or if something really stood out to you or surprised and intrigued you, if you wouldn't mind coming off mute and just sharing, 2 minutes or 3 minutes what you all talked about. And if no one volunteers, I will just pick someone at random. So.
Hi, Lee. My name is Dwayne Marshall. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. First of all, good afternoon to you and good afternoon to everyone else. I had the opportunity to be in a break room with Stacy from the Gettysburg, Pennsylvania area. And I just want to flag, just as part of me and Stacy's conversation, all too often when we have these conversations about upward mobility, especially economic mobility, they're so incredibly centered on urban centers and urban areas for obvious reasons. That's where the most of Americans live. But in Stacy's case, she's trying to address this issue and unpack it in a rural area, which obviously they have very similar challenges. So I just want to lift that up, one. And two, if there is a rural area or a rural network that you think might be helpful to her and her efforts, that would be something good to put in the chat just to kind of help her with her learning and exploring, just to flag that. But one of the things that me and Stacy talked about is me being a native of Savannah, which I just recently moved to. Savannah, as part of the COVID response and some of the other economic and racial unrest that took place in 2020, created what is called a Savannah REAL Task Force. The word REAL is an acronym for Racial Equity and Leadership. It's a part of a national movement affiliated with the National League of Cities, or NLC for short. And as part of that task force that was created on a local level, it became a cross-sector leadership action table to address issues around upward mobility, around some of the key challenging areas in the city of Savannah, specifically around housing, economic development, and access to capital for BIPOC entrepreneurs. So although I'm new back to my community, one of the ways, as I mentioned to Stacy, that I'm trying to lean into that work is to join that table. And the last thing I'll say, the reason why I'm so passionate about this work is prior to coming back to Savannah 10 months ago, I worked for the Community Foundation of Greater Chattanooga in Southeast Tennessee. And my community foundation at the time was standing up a comprehensive mobility strategy for the city and county. And the framework that we were studying as part of our effort was the urban mobility or upward mobility framework by the Urban Institute. Our consultant at the time was Nisha Patel, who was also heavily involved in that work. And although I'm no longer in that community, I'm trying to bring some of those strategies and some of those solutions to my market in Savannah. So again, thank you, and glad to be all this afternoon.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing all that, Dwayne. And it's wonderful to hear that you have some experience with this framework and that it was potentially useful. And I know our team is talking behind the scenes about getting some rural resources out there, but I think your comment raises a really good question too about just the idea of upward mobility and how the way that we might tend to think about it is that it means the same thing across communities and the same thing across different demographics of people, but upward mobility for a rural community might mean something completely different than what it means for someone living in a city. And so I think we provide this definition that is supposed to be broad because we want you all to take it back to your community and interpret it in the way that it is most meaningful for the folks that are actually you're working for. So thank you for lifting that up. I am gonna pass it to Alexis to present.
Thank you, Lee. I am positive that there is a lot of excellent work happening in just that short share out, right? 2 different communities who are doing exciting work. And it looks like there's a good bit of connections happening in the chat, so I want to continue to encourage that. One of the things we wanted to do today is share a variety of resources that can support upward mobility efforts in your community. So Urban has a number of these resources, including the upward mobility specific resources that we'll spend most of our time on today, which Katie is going to put the link in the chat to that website. So this includes the history and evidence around upward mobility, centering on the upward mobility framework, the mobility metrics, and everything that is being shared in these virtual mobility workshops, as well as blogs and more. Urban also has additional expertise. We have a robust focus on evidence, which means that in any particular area of focus or policy domain related to upward mobility, we likely have tools and resources to support your specific efforts. One of those is our Community Engagement Resource Center, which has robust community engagement and racial equity tools. But there are a number of other economic mobility resources outside of Urban that connect directly to economic mobility in the context of upward mobility that we are talking about today, including the Opportunity Insights Opportunity Atlas. Opportunity Insights, many of you may be familiar with, is a nonpartisan, not-for-profit organization based at Harvard. The Opportunity Atlas allows users to look at mobility trends and opportunities at the neighborhood, county, and metro level. Results for America's Economic Mobility Catalog, which includes additional examples of how communities and programs are demonstrating the dimensions of upward mobility across multiple domains, and links to Urban's mobility metrics. And then the Measuring Mobility Toolkit provides, categorized by each part of the three-part definition: economic success, dignity and belonging, power and autonomy, validated measures that can help organizations measure how each domain is included in programmatic efforts. Many of these are individual or household level assessments, and programs can use them with their clients and interventions to show impact connected to broader upward mobility planning efforts. And Dwayne mentioned one of these networks, but there are a number of networks across the country that are focusing on upward mobility that you or someone in your community is likely already engaged with. From the National Association of Counties, which does have a rural focus, to the National League of Cities, International City Managers Association, and CF Leads for Community Foundations, as just a few examples. These can be a great next step for moving upward mobility forward in your community by connecting with one of these networks. And in particular, I'd like to highlight the Government Alliance for Racial Equity, or GARE, their Racial Equity Action Plans, a how-to manual. So we're going to put that in the chat as well. So there are a lot of resources that are out there, but today we're going to spend most of our time on the Planning Guide for Local Action, which is an upward mobility initiative resource that you can utilize regardless of what stage of upward mobility planning or action you are in. So the guide offers a beginning point for people wondering where to start to boost mobility from poverty, and outlines a roadmap of steps for doing this work. This guide will lead users like you through a planning process that involves building a cross-sector team, gathering and analyzing data, conducting community engagement and stakeholder engagement, and all of the steps that Lee mentioned earlier, so that you can create a mobility action plan, which can set forth strategic actions to boost mobility from poverty and advance equity in your community. It was developed with city and county leaders in mind, but anyone interested in this mobility action planning effort can also use it. And as we learn from communities applying this, we are continuing to adapt it based on what we are learning. Each step is available as a singular PDF that includes key elements of the upward mobility framework in bold, highlights examples of upward mobility action across the country, and identifies community engagement opportunities and activities. Supplemental materials are also provided for each step, including worksheets, sample agendas, checklists, and templates. Next slide. So each section of this guide is a step in the process. My mobility action planning process is rooted in the Urban Institute's experience helping communities boost mobility from poverty and advance racial equity. There are 10 steps. If your community is at the beginning stages of mobility action planning, you may want to start with steps 1, 2, and 3, but you may be further along in the process or have done some of these, so you don't necessarily have to take them in order, though you'll want to make sure to take a look at each one of them. Today, we aren't going to be able to cover all of these steps and resources in depth, but we're going to highlight a few tools and resources that can help you take more immediate action. You go to the next slide. So we're going to focus on a few tools in the planning guide that really are great action steps. So whether that's understanding and surfacing insights from the mobility metrics and local data to inform your decisions, building or expanding a cross-sector coalition, or determining actions as part of a mobility action plan, what those strategic actions should be and how you could measure and sustain your impact. You can see for each one of those, there are a couple of different steps that you can take. So steps 2, 5, and 6 are all great places to start and expand on existing work when it comes to using data to inform decision-making, which is a core principle of upward mobility planning, from understanding the mobility metrics to connecting with local data to building the full picture of mobility conditions in your community with your community members. These are a few of the tools that are available, and one tool is sample data walk posters from Boone County, Missouri. A data walk or a data interactive is a common method useful for presenting existing data, which could be the mobility metrics, maps, other survey or other data that you have, to community members. It informs the community about the information gathered, asks for their input and feedback, and when done well, is a collaborative way to inform priorities and make decisions and commitments. Many of our counties, like Boone County, Missouri, have chosen to hold data interactives and use data sharing as the foundation for collaboration. In this process, residents engage with a presentation of posters with information about their communities while reacting to and discussing what they see with facilitators. These open conversations about the data empower residents to explore conditions in their community and identify gaps in services and programs that could be strengthened, and to push back if the data do not reflect their lived experience. And there's a link to the tool, the example of the Boone County data walk. Creating and sustaining the conditions for boosting people out of poverty requires an all hands on deck approach. Engaging stakeholders whose unique perspectives on community challenge and work across the systems that hold poverty and inequity in place is critical to helping identify and implement the right strategic actions. A sustainable, successful, equitable coalition fosters the culture of inclusion with opportunities to expand partnerships with new stakeholders, empowers and engages individuals with lived experience, seeks opportunities for intentional learning together as a coalition, has a common agenda, understands key roles, has a management team, and more. And these are a few of the resources the planning guide has to help you understand and develop this and to launch the coalition. Noting that Lee shared this example earlier from Summit County, many of the actors who are involved in the coalition. And you may already be familiar with coalitions in your community or a part of them tackling upward mobility, or maybe you're just getting started. The stakeholder inventory in the planning guide is a really helpful way for your core team or existing coalition to begin to map current and needed relationships. We have a 5-part tool that helps you document and reflect on the assets existing and needed for coalition success. It helps you understand who is a part of those who are in those relationships, where you might leverage or build new connection points, thinking about the key populations and domains that are relevant to upward mobility that still need to be represented in your coalition, and begin to build and prioritize an invitation list. After understanding more about the mobility conditions in your community through the mobility metrics and community expertise, and pulling together your coalition, then you can begin to ask, what are the top priorities that are needed to achieve the community's vision for upward mobility? What are the actions that need to take place, and who is going to take them, and how will they be measured and sustained? Theories of change connect a vision to strategic action. This is Ramsey County, Minnesota, as an example of a theory of change. Theories of change articulate how a group believes change happens, help challenge underlying assumptions about what it takes to create that change, reflects a set of assumptions that connect preconditions, what you need for change to happen, with expected outcomes, improvements you can see. and effectively communicate about your purpose and the change intended. Theories of change can build and reinforce community buy-in and create an accountability framework for strategic actions. And we have a great tool in step 7 to help you walk through them. So in short, regardless of wherever you are now in your community, it's small forward movements that lead to long-term progress. Before we open it up for questions, we want to take a moment to reflect and think back about what is one tool or example that you hope to learn more about for your community. We're going to take a poll. And you can also put your answer in the chat. All right, so we'll give it just a couple more seconds. One tool or example you want to learn more about for your community. Okay, I think we can close that poll. We're gonna open a second poll. It looks like it just launched. So if you also want to identify what is the next step you want to take for yourself, we'll do that in about 30 seconds, and then we will spend a little bit of time sharing out. All right, 30 more seconds. Folks want to share on the poll? I know it's an open-ended question, so what's the next step that you're hoping to take? All right, and you are welcome once you've taken the poll too to share in the chat as well. All right, we're gonna do 5 more seconds and then we will close that poll. All right, so in addition to sharing in the chat, we thought we can take 5 minutes or so and we can ask questions, but also if you all want to share something that has come up for you that you were just sharing, what's a resource that you want to know more about, feel free to raise your hand if you'd like to come off of mute.